do I look like I want to go drink tea and watch a play tonight? I guess not, dude. Yeah, I guess not. And he's like, but you know what? If she's happy, then it makes my life less of a hell, so it makes me happy. And like, it just goes from like the sweetest thing I ever heard in the world to the saddest thing in the world. Yeah, and then that's amplified when you consider that Andy killed himself like 8 years ago on the last day of school. Yeah, literally threw himself off of his balcony. He lived over in downtown across the street from the police station. Threw himself off the balcony.
He couldn't handle it?
He couldn't handle a lot of stuff. Yeah. Yeah, and that's the thing is that so the guy's, he's a fascinating guy. He was like 5'5" or so he's about 5'5". But he's voted one of the 50 greatest athletes to come out of San Diego. The guy played college baseball. He played college football. He was drafted to play baseball by the Kansas City Royals, but he didn't want to play baseball because everyone told him he was too small. To play football. So he wanted to go prove himself that he could play professional football. He actually held the CIF touchdown record until Reggie Bush broke it. So if you know anything about football, you know who Reggie Bush is, and he's the guy. Andy held the record until Reggie Bush broke it. He ended up going and playing in the Canadian Football League, and he was doing that as a way of trying to get into the NFL. And then the Canadian Football League went out of, just folded, went out of business, and then he couldn't get a tryout, so he started drinking a lot, and he became a bartender, which is interesting, over at this restaurant over in Mission Valley called Bully's. And then from there, he became a teacher, because that's kind of what you do, right? You go from alcoholism into becoming a teacher. Usually goes the other way around. And he was a terrible teacher. He acknowledged it. And then when they started the Learning Center, he went to them and just said, look, I'm a terrible teacher, but I'm pretty good at paperwork. So can I just run the Learning Center? And so he ran the Learning Center. He made like $150,000 a year running the Learning Center. His wife, however, you guys ever heard of Herbalife? Like the supplement? Yeah, his wife was part of the Herbalife family. So his wife, he used to tell me, had more money than God. So she was loaded. So they were very, very wealthy. And he's an interesting guy, by the way, man. After he died, I was talking to one of the custodians here, and he was telling me a story about how one time Andy was asking him what time it was, and the custodian said, I don't know, I don't have a watch. And Andy's like, you have a watch? You need to have a watch, you're a custodian. So he says, wait right here. And Andy ran into the clubhouse over there, came out and gave the dude his watch. And the custodian was showing me the watch that Andy gave him. He gave him a Rolex, man. If you guys know anything about watches, it's like a $15,000 watch he gave him.
Wow.
That's the kind of guy he was, though. And he would just give you the shirt off of his back. But anyway, so he started kind of reverted back to alcoholism, and I was friends with his family, so they kind of told me what really happened with the guy. Because it was initially said that he was drunk and he fell off of his balcony. Again, he was 5'5", and he had a balcony that was 5'3", 5 feet 3 inches. So in other words, he was like this much taller than the balcony, and they said that he just fell over, which of course is not the case. But if any of you guys have like older siblings or family members, and you ask them about Andy's tensions, they'll probably know who he was. He was pretty well known, even on the campus, and even in San Diego generally. But this is the guy who I was thinking, in retrospect, I'm like, I don't know why he felt that need to be so dishonest. I mean, to the point where, like, I guess it was like Jekyll and Hyde, man. He just like switched as soon as that phone hung up. Yeah.
So, like, looking at that story, that wife had that devotion, like a fear to God, like devotion, like serving Him. Mm-hmm. But since he was like this guy says, that was a fallible God, and they failed. With all the imperfections that he had, it didn't work out.
Yeah, exactly. Because she probably saw him as being something more than what he was. Like, for example, if we think about God, what is it for God to be God? What are the attributes?
Perfect. Loving.
Yeah, exactly. First off, perfect.
All powerful.
Yeah, and perfect in usually 3 senses: power, love, perfect in love, perfect in power, and there's one more.
Wrath.
What's that? Wrath. Oh no.
Someone said wisdom.
Wisdom. There you go. Wisdom.
Wasn't you some guy over there?
There you go. Perfect wisdom. So, omnipotent, omnibenevolent, and omniscient. Those are the technical terms for it. And so, God is perfect in supposed to be in all of these things. And so it's interesting, by the way. This isn't too different from when we were little kids. And like in terms of like for example, if you have a father, our father is like the most powerful, biggest, strongest person in the world. My dad was the fastest person in the world. You should see how quickly he left my family and never came back. We also think of them like perfectly loving and like they know everything. Because you'll ask him like some question about like, you know, where do whales live? And he'll be like in the ocean, like, oh wow, you're so smart. And so it isn't too different from when we have parents. And that matters because it's kind of like people a lot of times make that transition from living with parents into living with a spouse. And so there's kind of like a replacement that goes on there, or a supplement. And so when you love a God, the reason that we love the God is because the God kind of makes up for the things that we're not. You know, like, you know, maybe I lack power, so I feel weak myself, so therefore I have a God now who can kind of make up that difference. Maybe I realize I need some help with love, or maybe I lack love, or I just don't feel like I'm loved enough, so we have that. And then we don't, I mean, what the hell do I know? I mean, think about the smartest person in the world. Whoever it is, if they go to a library, what they don't know could fill a library. So no matter how smart you are, you're still only a person. It's like the strongest person in the room is still only a person. The smartest person in the room is still only a person. And that carries with it all of that fallibility, the imperfections. Because as loving as you might be, like, can you love somebody and still cheat on them? Yeah, probably. Depending on the reasons for the cheating. Like, you might be unhappy in a relationship, but as you guys were saying earlier, you still want to make that person happy because you love them. And people will say, you can't love somebody and cheat on them. I don't know, it's probably, I mean, I don't know if any of you have ever cheated on somebody, but it's possible, perhaps, yeah.
But sometimes you cheat because, like, because you don't see, like, how much you have, and you're not satisfied with it until you realize, like, you're not happy with it until you miss it.
Yeah, that's common, by the way. Like, to be unhappy, a lot of times it comes, I guess we should put it the other direction. It comes from not realizing what it is that you have. Like, we're unsatisfied because we believe that you know, we could get so much more than what we presently have. And by the way, that is really, really, really important. It goes directly to this idea. You know, if we feel like, if we're unsatisfied, well, then that's when we'll start looking around. You know, and we feel like we're unsatisfied because maybe the person, we start to realize some of their flaws. Like when you're first with a person, I mean, they're the greatest person in the world. You overlook a lot of things that you're not going to overlook later on. You know, even in terms of like maybe something is a little bit deficient in the looks, but maybe some people are thinking, well, you know, something's better than nothing. And so they end up going with that person. We can overlook, like maybe they've got, I don't know, a strange haircut, and we just say, they're just eccentric. You know, or they're not necessarily the smartest, not even close to the smartest person. Maybe they're not even particularly smart. But you know what? They're funny, or they're nice, and so you overlook that. And then you're with the person for a while, and then the lack of intelligence starts to show long term. You know, you guys encounter some kind of a problem, and you ask the person, what do you want to do about it? And they're like, oh, I don't know. Well, how can you not know? Don't you think about it? You know, they probably do. They're just not particularly smart. And that didn't bother you at first because they were so good looking or because they were funny that you can overlook the lack of intelligence. But especially if you're looking long term, the looks are going to go away. The funniness might go away because maybe you kind of get used to their humor, but that lack of intelligence seems to stay. And by the way, there's a correlation between looks and intelligence. We tend to think of people who are good looking as being stupid. No. Good looking people tend to be more intelligent than average. And that makes sense, by the way. That makes sense because the number one predictor of your success in life is going to be your IQ, your intelligence. And so intelligent people tend to do very well in life. And the better you do, the more of a choice of mates you have, and people tend to go towards people who are good looking. And then if you're intelligent, and then you have kids with someone who's good looking, those kids will tend to be more intelligent and also better looking, and it perpetuates. So it makes sense. But this thing up here about being unsatisfied, that's going to do a lot in your life, man. I mean, I don't know how to say it except just that it can be a killer, but it can also be a motivator. Like if you're at a place in your life that you're unsatisfied, maybe it can propel you to do better. But if you're at a place in your life where you're unsatisfied, it can also make you, as you're saying, really unhappy with what you have. Like, somebody asked me before, how do you know when you're ready to marry somebody, when you're to love someone for the rest of your life? And the best thing I could come up with was, if the person you're with was hit by a bus today and was horribly disfigured, would you still marry him? And if the answer to that question is yes, then maybe. It might be someone who you could spend time with, because your looks are going to go away probably. But those other attributes, maybe, it's oftentimes you'll hear people who they want to have like you're the kind of person, for example, who needs to be with somebody who's willing to take charge. Guys, be willing to take charge. Don't be the person who's like, what do you want to eat? I don't know, what do you want to eat? I don't know, what do you want to eat? Who wants to be with an indecisive person? If you're with a person who's indecisive, get ready, because then when tragedies hit, when real decisions in life have to be made, don't be surprised if that person then kind of puts their hands in their pockets and shrugs and is like, I don't know. Yeah, well, what should we do about this? This is a big deal. I don't know. Don't you have an opinion about anything? I don't know. Indecisive people tend to be indecisive. But then again, you also don't want the person who's over the top hyper aggressive and wants to decide everything for themselves either. You have to figure out what works with you. Nothing is everything. What works for one person is not going to work for another. But when we fall in love with a person, we tend to think of them as perfect. All those flaws that we would otherwise overlook, we no longer are willing to overlook. So then when the person falls short, I guess the question becomes, whose fault is that? People always revert back to who they are. And so when someone falls short of it, whose fault is that? Is it the fault of the person who never claimed to be perfect? It's like I'm pretty clear, aren't I? Am I a role model? I've told you guys since week 1, I've told you guys many times, I am not a role model. I am not a role model. And I look up at that board and I think, that's pretty interesting. Scanlon is Hitler, and I'm also an idol. I don't think I'm either of those, but whatever. People are entitled to their opinion. But when we find somebody who we think of as being a role model, and then we elevate them, and then they fall, and we no longer see them as perfect. I mean, the person probably never claimed to be perfect, and even if they did, we should have known better, because nobody's perfect. So when a person falls short of our ideals, it's really our fault for putting it on them. Oh, they're perfect, they're this, they're all these things, but they're flawed though. No, they're perfect to me. Be careful, man. When someone can see your flaws and then still love you anyway. Don't let me forget to tell you about that. 36 questions. I forgot to tell class yesterday. But when someone can see you as flawed and still love you anyway, well then you've got something. And not just like I see their flaws and I tolerate them. That's a bad thing to be. But instead I see their flaws and I get it. People have flaws. Think about what you're imperfect in. And think about the things that you're imperfect in that you try to hide. It blows me away how people who never read, never study, never think, try really, really hard to come off as smart. Well, if you want to be smart, that's what you have to do. You have to read, you have to think, you have to engage ideas. But we don't want to do that. And so we'll try to hide it. We'll try to even use some big words. We'll learn some big words to try to fool people into thinking that we're smart. But that's also important, by the way. Pay attention to the things that you're lying about yourself, because that tells you who you wish you were. If you're lying and telling people that I went and ran the LA Marathon, well then, but you didn't. So what does that tell you? It tells you that you're somebody who wishes that they could run a marathon. You admire people who run marathons. So if you want to be someone who's admirable, at least to yourself, go run the marathon. You don't have to win it, you just have to finish it. And now you've learned something about yourself. If you tell people, oh yeah, I read those books, now you know who you are. You're somebody who admires people who reads a certain set of books. So go read them now. That way you can admire yourself. And then an interesting thing is going to happen. When you can admire yourself, you aren't going to lie as much about yourself, because the admiration of others won't matter as much, because you admire yourself. It's kind of like how, if you want to impress the world, the first thing you should do is try to impress yourself, because you're probably your own harshest critic. And if you can impress yourself, then you're probably impressing the world without even realizing it. So Be careful about the gods that we create and the things that we expect too much from. Because they are fallible. But again, that's a problem with us, not with them. Questions, comments, concerns, complaints, criticism, critiques? Yeah.